The master of Mississippi always picked the weakest men for combat, yet no one foresaw what happened next. Deep in Mississippi during 1858, Master Calvin Thornwood followed a savage tradition. Whenever an enslaved person became unproductive, he summoned them for one final confrontation right there on the plantation grounds beneath the blazing sun before the entire population. The conditions were straightforward. Triumph and secure your liberty. Fall and perish in combat. For the master, this served as a method to eliminate those who no longer benefited him while instilling terror in the rest. He would select anyone, an elderly gentleman, a feeble young laborer, even an ill child. His brutality became the plantation's entertainment. 23 men had confronted him. 23 men had met their end. Yet on a damp August morning, events took an unexpected turn. The men Thornwood summoned that particular day had been behaving oddly for weeks, shifting more sluggishly, coughing more frequently, tripping in the fields. Everyone believed his end was near. Everyone except one individual. When the master presented the challenge, the plantation fell into complete stillness. The frail man advanced. No dread in his gaze, no reluctance in his movement. And at that instant, certain elderly enslaved individuals identified something. A design they'd witnessed previously. A tactic older than the plantation itself. What followed would transform everything. But the master remained completely unaware of what approached. Before we proceed with this remarkable tale of retribution, remember to subscribe to the channel and indicate which city you're observing this battle from. Let's continue. Thornwood Plantation stretched across 4,000 acres of Mississippi Delta territory, fertile, dark ground that yielded cotton generously. The sort of land that enriched white men and caused black people to endure. During 1858, the plantation operated at maximum capacity. 312 enslaved individuals labored from sunrise to darkness, 6 days weekly, with merely Sunday afternoons for recuperation. They inhabited rows of basic huts behind the primary residence, rested on wooden platforms, received portions of cornmeal and salted pork, wore garments constructed from the most inexpensive material, existed in a condition of constant exhaustion and dread. Calvin Thornwood possessed all of this, had acquired the plantation from his father, Richard Thornwood, during 1851. Calvin was 28 years old when he assumed control as master. Youthful, driven, and resolved to demonstrate even greater success than his father. Richard had been a conventional plantation proprietor. Harsh, certainly, but predictably harsh. Whipping for violations, sales dividing families, overwork until bodies collapsed, standard control methods employed by every plantation. Yet Calvin desired something beyond. He craved complete supremacy, wanted his enslaved people to dread him in ways they'd never dreaded his father. He examined control techniques, perused publications about training horses, applied those principles to breaking humans, developed methods of mental torment, of erratic brutality, of performances meant to traumatize and horrify. And his most impactful performance was the combats. The ritual commenced during March 1855. An enslaved man named Abraham had reached 63 years that year. His hands were twisted with arthritis. His spine was permanently curved from decades of field labor. He couldn't match the pace of younger workers. Slowed down his harvesting team. Calvin observed him struggling for a week. Then one morning summoned him to the center of the work area. Proclaimed to the gathered enslaved people that Abraham would battle him. If Abraham won, he'd gain freedom. If he lost, well, he wouldn't require freedom anymore. Abraham was petrified, understood he stood no chance against a vigorous young master. Yet what alternative existed? Refuse and be whipped until dead. At least fighting offered him a tiny chance of survival. So he fought, lifted his arthritic hands, attempted to protect himself. Calvin toyed with him for 30 seconds, let him throw feeble strikes that missed. Then Calvin retaliated. One tremendous blow to Abraham's jaw. The elderly man collapsed. Didn't rise. Calvin kicked his ribs, his head, his back. Continued kicking until Abraham ceased moving, ceased breathing, expired in the dust while 300 people observed. Calvin stood over the corpse, breathing heavily, covered in Abraham's blood, and he grinned, glanced around at the terrified expressions. Anyone else wish to decelerate? Desire to become worthless? This represents your outcome. This is what awaits you. The message was unmistakable. Labor until you collapse or perish fighting. Those were the sole choices. The other plantation proprietors learned of Calvin's approach. Some condemned it. Charles Morrison from the adjacent plantation informed Calvin he was destroying valuable assets. That selling elderly or ill enslaved individuals proved more economical than eliminating them. Yet Calvin disagreed. Fear outweighs the selling price of a depleted enslaved person. One deceased man in the dust teaches 100 others to labor harder. That increased productivity compensates for the loss. And he was correct. During the months following Abraham's death, productivity on Thornwood Plantation rose 12%. People worked through pain-concealed sickness, pushed past their boundaries because the alternative was the circle, was the master's fists, was death before everyone. The approach functioned and Calvin kept employing it. Over 3 years 23 men perished in that circle. Not all elderly, not all ill. Some were simply unfortunate. Had an incident that left them somewhat impaired. Caught a fever that weakened them. Developed a cough that lingered. Anything that identified them as below fully productive made them targets. Calvin would observe, would wait until someone couldn't conceal their weakness anymore, then summon them, make them fight, make them die. The 23 deaths had names, had histories, had families who grieved them. Abraham was initial, then Isaac, who'd broken his leg and never healed properly. Then Moses, who developed a lung disease. Then Samuel, whose back injury made him unable to lift heavy loads. Then Josiah, who'd gone partially blind. One by one, month by month, the death count accumulated and the terror intensified. Yet fear also cultivates other things. Resentment, hatred, and in some individuals determination to oppose. The enslaved couldn't rebel openly. Mississippi law was structured to prevent that. Any assembly exceeding 5 enslaved people without white oversight was forbidden. Teaching enslaved people to read was forbidden. Enslaved people testifying against whites in court was forbidden. The entire legal framework was designed to make organized opposition impossible. Yet the enslaved discovered alternative methods. Quiet methods, patient methods, methods that wouldn't be apparent until the moment they acted. Elijah was one of those patient individuals. Born during 1824 on a plantation in South Carolina. His mother's name was Ruth. His father's name he never discovered. Could have been any of several white men who assaulted his mother over the years. Elijah was sold at age 15 when his original master died and the estate was liquidated. A trader purchased him, chained him to a group with 20 other enslaved people, marched them overland to Mississippi, sold them at auction in Jackson. Elijah went to Richard Thornwood for $850. Considered a worthwhile investment, youthful, powerful, intelligent enough to learn tasks quickly, yet not so intelligent as to be threatening. Elijah had been on Thornwood Plantation for 19 years. Had watched Richard Thornwood manage it for 4 years. Had watched Calvin assume control during 1851. Had witnessed the transition from conventional brutality to Calvin's refined cruelty. Had observed all 23 deaths in the circle. And throughout all of it, Elijah had been careful, had performed the role of the obedient enslaved person, industrious, compliant, non-threatening, never gave the overseers cause to notice him, never attracted attention, simply survived and watched, always watched. Because Elijah was learning, was studying Calvin's methods, was analyzing how the combats operated. Calvin was powerful, unquestionably. 6 feet tall, 200 pounds of muscle, possessed natural athletic capability, yet he wasn't trained. Didn't understand formal fighting techniques. Relied on fury and strength, relied on his opponents being feeble, terrified, and unable to protect themselves adequately. Against elderly men and ill youths, that was adequate. Yet what would occur against someone who could actually fight back? Someone youthful and powerful who understood what they were doing. The question fascinated Elijah, yet he possessed no combat instruction, no knowledge of fighting beyond the desperate scuffles that occasionally erupted between enslaved people, no techniques that would enable him to defeat a man who outweighed him by 40 pounds. So Elijah did something quietly revolutionary. He pursued knowledge from the eldest individuals on the plantation, the ones who remembered Africa, the ones who'd been transported on slave vessels, the ones who carried memories of existence before captivity. There was a woman named Sarah. She'd been on Thornwood Plantation for 43 years, had been transported from West Africa during 1815 at age 22, had endured the Middle Passage, had endured 4 decades of slavery. She was 65 years old during 1858. Too aged for demanding field work, yet kept alive because she was valuable as a midwife and healer. Knew herbs and treatments, could deliver infants and cure illnesses. The plantation required her abilities even if her body was deteriorating. Sarah also understood things the white people didn't understand. Combat techniques from her homeland. The Igbo people from what's now Nigeria possessed warrior traditions, understood how to battle larger opponents, understood pressure points and vulnerable areas on the human form, understood how to transform an enemy's strength against them. This knowledge had no application in slavery, would only get you killed if you attempted to employ it. Yet Sarah remembered, and when Elijah approached her quietly one evening, when he inquired if she understood how to fight, she comprehended what he was planning. "You wish to confront the master?" She said it wasn't a question. They were isolated near the water source. Nobody could overhear. Elijah nodded. "I'm exhausted from watching people die. Exhausted from living in terror. I wish to do something. Even if it kills me. Wish to at least attempt." Sarah studied him. Saw the resolve. Saw the anger that had been accumulating for 19 years, finally spoke. "I can instruct you not everything that would require years, yet sufficient. Sufficient to possibly win a fight if your adversary doesn't anticipate opposition." Over the following months, Sarah instructed Elijah in secrecy. After nightfall in concealed locations, she demonstrated where to strike for maximum effect, the solar plexus to knock the breath out, the liver to cause debilitating pain, the throat to choke, the eyes to blind, the knees to. She taught him how to employ leverage, how a smaller person could throw a larger one, how to redirect force rather than oppose it directly. She taught him foot movement, how to shift, how to evade strikes, how to create angles. Ancient knowledge transmitted through generations, now weaponized for one desperate purpose. Yet knowledge alone wasn't adequate. Elijah needed opportunity, needed Calvin to select him for the circle. Yet Calvin only selected the feeble, the obviously deteriorating. So Elijah had to become feeble. Had to convince everyone, including Calvin, that he was declining, that he was becoming a burden, that he warranted being summoned. During June 1858, Elijah began his performance, started moving slower in the fields, would drop his cotton sack as if his hands couldn't grip properly, would stumble over nothing, would cough frequently as if developing lung disease. Minor things initially, easy to dismiss as temporary, yet consistent. Day after day, week after week, the performance intensified. Elijah lost weight deliberately, ate less, made himself appear gaunt, hollowed his cheeks, slumped his shoulders to seem smaller, made his movements labored, made it appear like every task demanded tremendous effort from him. The overseers observed Marcus Kane was head overseer, a vicious man who'd held the position for 6 years. He reported to Calvin that Elijah seemed to be deteriorating rapidly. Don't know what's affecting him. Maybe consumption, maybe simply exhausted, yet he's becoming an issue, slowing down his entire work group. Calvin came to observe, watched Elijah for several days, saw the stumbling, the coughing, the apparent weakness, decided Elijah was depleted, would soon need to be eliminated, started planning the next demonstration. Yet there was one person who perceived through Elijah's performance. Sarah knew obviously because she was assisting him plan it. Yet there was also a young woman named Grace. She was 23 years old, had been born on the plantation, was beautiful despite the hardships of slavery, and she was in love with Elijah. They'd been together for 2 years, not married. Enslaved people couldn't legally marry, yet together in every way that mattered. Grace understood Elijah better than anyone. Understood his actual strength, understood his intelligence, and she realized what he was doing. She confronted him one night. They were alone in his hut. "You're planning something. planning to get summoned to the circle, planning to fight Calvin. Elijah didn't deny it. Couldn't deceive her. I must do something. Can't simply wait to become old and die in that circle like everyone else. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You'll die regardless. Even if you win the fight, they'll kill you afterward. You understand that. There's no escape from this. Elijah grasped her hands. Perhaps, probably. Yet I'd prefer to die fighting than die pleading. Prefer to die attempting to hurt him than die for his amusement. And perhaps I won't die. Perhaps there's a method to survive this, to flee, to become free. Grace wanted to trust him. Wanted to believe there was hope. Yet she'd watched 23 men die. Had no reason to think Elijah would be different. If you do this, she said, if you proceed with this, I'm losing you. One way or another, you'll be gone. Then accompany me, Elijah said. If I somehow survive, if I somehow flee, accompany me. We'll escape together, discover freedom together. Grace pulled away. That's a dream. A fantasy. No one flees Mississippi. The slave hunters always discover you. Always bring you back. And even if you reach the north, I'm a female. I can't run like you can. I'd delay you. Get us both captured. She was crying now. I love you, yet I won't observe you die in that circle. When they summon you, I'll look away. I can't witness it occur. Elijah understood. It was excessive to request, excessive to anticipate anyone to observe. He held her while she cried, memorized the sensation of her, the scent of her, knowing this might be their final night together, that his plan would either lead to freedom or death, that either way, this existence was ending. After she departed, Elijah lay awake. Considered retreating, about abandoning the plan, about simply continuing to survive. Yet he couldn't. Had progressed too far. Had committed too completely. Had to see it through. The summons came on August 15, 1858. A Monday morning, damp even at dawn. The temperature would reach 95 degrees by midday. The field enslaved people assembled in the work area for their tasks. The overseers were organizing crews when Calvin emerged from the main residence. He was dressed informally, white linen shirt, dark trousers, leather boots. He walked with the confidence of someone who'd never lost, someone who'd killed 23 men and felt invincible. Marcus Kane rang the bell. 3 sharp strikes, the signal that meant halt everything. The signal that meant someone was about to perish. All work halted. All 312 enslaved people assembled. They understood what was approaching. Had witnessed it 23 times previously. Understood every detail of the ritual. The circle marked in earth. The fight that wasn't genuinely a fight. The inevitable death. Some appeared resigned. Some appeared terrified. All appeared trapped. Calvin surveyed the crowd. Let the tension build. Let the fear spread. Enjoyed the power of the moment. Finally spoke. We've got dead weight on this plantation. People not pulling their share. People taking resources without producing value. His eyes found Elijah in the crowd. Elijah, step forward. The crowd parted, created a path. Elijah walked through it, head lowered, shoulders slumped, every movement suggesting exhaustion and defeat. He stopped 15 feet from Calvin. Didn't look up. Played his role perfectly. You've been declining, Calvin said, becoming feeble, becoming useless. I've been observing you, seen you stumbling around, coughing, acting like you can barely work. So, we're going to settle this the customary way. You and me, right here, right now. Same rules as always. You win, you're free, you lose. He smiled. That dreadful smile the enslaved people had learned to fear. Well, you won't have to worry about being tired anymore. The white overseers laughed. They stood in a loose circle around the work area. 6 of them, all armed with whips and clubs, all there to prevent any enslaved person from interfering. all confident in the result. They'd witnessed this 23 times. Knew how it concluded. Another deceased enslaved person. Another reminder of who held power. Another day at Thornwood Plantation. Yet something occurred that made Calvin hesitate. Elijah raised his head, looked directly into Calvin's eyes, and smiled. Not a submissive smile, not a fearful smile, a knowing smile. The smile of someone who possesses a secret. I accept your challenge, Master. Let's observe what occurs. The manner Elijah said, Master, was incorrect. Carried mockery. Carried disrespect. Carried confidence that shouldn't exist. Calvin felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of uncertainty. Yet he'd issued the challenge, had observers, couldn't withdraw now without appearing feeble. Marcus, mark the circle, he ordered. Marcus Cain used a stick to scratch a circle in the earth, 20 feet in diameter, standard size. 23 men had perished within that circle. About to be 24. Calvin removed his shirt, revealed his physique, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds of muscle, arms thick from years of riding and manual work, chest broad, shoulders powerful. He was in his prime at 35 years old. Appeared like what he was, a hazardous man. The enslaved people who'd never observed him without a shirt murmured. Their fear intensified. How could anyone fight that? Then Elijah removed his shirt and everything transformed. His body wasn't wasted at all. Was lean and defined. Muscles clearly visible beneath skin. Scars everywhere. Back, chest, arms. Testimony to 19 years of slavery. Yet beneath the scars was strength. Genuine strength. Not the appearance of weakness he'd been displaying for 2 months. His actual body. Grace gasped. Sarah nodded slightly. A few of the older enslaved people who'd suspected smiled grimly. The deception was exposed. Calvin stared, felt rage building. You've been manipulating me, pretending to be feeble, making a fool of me. Elijah shrugged. You chose to believe what you observed. Chose to think I was dying. That's not my fault. That's yours. The insolence was shocking. Enslaved people didn't address masters like that. Didn't display defiance. Didn't mock. Calvin's hands clenched into fists. I'm going to eliminate you gradually. Going to make you regret every word, every lie, every moment you thought you were clever. Perhaps, Elijah said, or perhaps today is the day you discover you're not invincible, that you can be defeated, that you can perish. He rolled his shoulders, loosened his neck, bounced on the balls of his feet, moved like someone who understood how to employ his body, like someone who trained. Calvin felt doubt intensify, yet also rage. This enslaved person needed to be destroyed, needed to be made an example, needed to perish badly. Marcus lowered his hand. The fight began. Calvin charged immediately, employed his standard tactic, overwhelming aggression, rush forward, drive the opponent back with size and violence, had worked 23 times. Yet Elijah didn't retreat, didn't panic, stepped to the side at the final moment, let Calvin's momentum carry him past. As Calvin stumbled past, Elijah drove his elbow into Calvin's ribs, hard, precisely positioned, employed all his weight and leverage. The impact fractured 2 ribs. Calvin gasped. Pain exploded through his chest. He'd never been hurt in these fights. Never felt genuine pain. Had always been the one inflicting it. The shock was nearly as severe as the injury. He turned, faced Elijah. Saw the enslaved person was smiling again. That's for Abraham, Elijah said quietly. For the initial man you killed. Calvin roared, charged again, swung a massive fist at Elijah's head, yet Elijah ducked beneath it, came up inside Calvin's guard, drove 3 rapid punches into his torso. Solar plexus, liver, kidney, Sarah's instruction, strike the soft targets, cause maximum pain, disable rather than merely hurt. Calvin staggered. Each punch had landed perfectly. His breath came in gasps. The fractured ribs made every inhalation agony. The liver shot sent nauseating pain through his abdomen. The kidney strike made his back spasm. He was hurt, seriously hurt, and the fight had barely started. The crowd of enslaved people observed in absolute silence. This wasn't following the script. The master was supposed to win easily, was supposed to beat the enslaved person to death within minutes. Yet Elijah was winning. Was dominating, was making Calvin appear slow and clumsy. The implications were staggering. If the master could be defeated, if he could be hurt, then perhaps he wasn't as powerful as he appeared. Perhaps the system wasn't as strong. Perhaps opposition was possible. Calvin attempted to grapple, attempted to employ his weight advantage, charged again. This time got his arms around Elijah, lifted him off the ground, attempted to throw him, yet Elijah twisted, employed techniques Sarah had taught him, found leverage points, shifted his weight, turned Calvin's strength against him, somehow reversed the throw. Calvin found himself flying through the air, struck the ground hard, dust erupting around him, breath knocked from his lungs. Before he could recover, Elijah was on him. Mounted his chest, fists raining down, face, throat, temples. Each strike calculated, each one designed to cause maximum damage. Calvin attempted to cover up, attempted to protect his head, yet the strikes kept coming. His nose shattered, blood poured from his nostrils, his lips split, teeth fractured, eyes began swelling shut. The beating was systematic, methodical. 19 years of accumulated anger channeled into focused violence. Marcus Cain started moving forward, started to intervene. The master was losing, was being beaten severely. This couldn't be permitted to continue. Yet Sarah stepped directly into his path. An elderly woman obstructing a young overseer. The master stated it was a fair fight. She said loudly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Stated the rules were straightforward. Win and secure liberty, lose and perish. Those were his words. You intervene now. You prove his word means nothing. Prove he can't win his own fights. Marcus hesitated. She was correct. Calvin had made this public. Had proclaimed the rules before witnesses. If the overseers interfered, it would undermine everything. Would demonstrate that the master's promises were false, would demonstrate he couldn't win without assistance. The other overseers glanced at each other uncertain, wanting to assist, yet trapped by the rules Calvin himself had established. In the circle, the beating continued. Elijah's fist struck down repeatedly. Calvin was barely conscious. His face was destroyed, blood everywhere, bones fractured. He attempted weakly to push Elijah off, yet he had no strength remaining, no leverage, no defense. He was being beaten to death before his own enslaved people, before his overseers, before everyone who was supposed to dread him. Finally, Elijah ceased, stood, looked down at Calvin, who was semi-conscious, bleeding heavily, barely breathing. You stated I'd win my freedom, Elijah said loud enough for everyone to hear. You stated those were the rules. You lose, I'm free. That's what you promised. He glanced around at the assembled crowd, ensuring every witness heard. Establishing his claim. I won according to your own rules. I'm free. For a moment, nobody moved. The enslaved people were in shock. The whites were paralyzed by disbelief. Then Marcus found his voice. You're a deceased man. You understand that, correct? Even if you won the fight, you can't walk away from this. We'll pursue you. We'll eliminate you. And it'll be slow. It'll be painful. We'll create an example that endures for days. Elijah nodded. Probably. Yet for right now, for these few minutes, I'm free. I defeated him. I won. And I want everyone here to remember this. Remember that he's merely a man, that he bleeds, that he can be defeated. Remember that you don't have to accept this, that opposition is possible. He looked directly at the enslaved people. Spoke to them, not to the whites. Remember me. Remember what occurred here. And when your moment arrives, when you get your chance, be prepared. Be courageous. Fight back. That's when the other whites arrived. plantation proprietors from neighboring properties who'd been visiting, guests from the main residence who'd been observing from the porch, other overseers who'd been working distant fields. They came running when they heard the disturbance. Came to restore order, to punish this uprising, to create an example. Within minutes, 20 white men surrounded Elijah. All armed, some with guns, some with whips, some with clubs. 20 against 1. No chance of survival. Yet Sarah had prepared for this, had spent weeks arranging, had recruited allies, had created contingency plans. The moment the whites started closing in on Elijah, she shouted one word, a word in Igbo, her native African language, a word the whites didn't comprehend. Ugbu. Now and the plantation exploded into coordinated disorder. 60 enslaved people moved at once, not attacking the whites. That would have been suicide, yet creating confusion, running in different directions, screaming, making noise, dropping tools with loud crashes, creating sensory overload. The whites couldn't focus on Elijah because they were being overwhelmed by motion and sound and confusion. Couldn't shoot into the crowd without striking each other or valuable property. Were momentarily paralyzed. In that disorder, Elijah ran, sprinted toward the tree line, toward the woods, toward the slim chance of escape. The whites started firing. Gunshots cracked through the damp air. Bullets buzzed past Elijah. Most missed, yet one caught him in the left shoulder. The impact spun him, dropped him to one knee. Pain exploded through his upper body, yet he forced himself up, kept running, made it to the trees, vanished into the forest. Behind him, the plantation descended into disorder. Whites shouting orders, dogs barking, the pursuit beginning. Yet the disorder bought Elijah precious time. By the time the whites organized a pursuit, by the time they got the dogs prepared, Elijah had a 15-minute head start. And he prepared for this. Had spent weeks planning escape routes. Had marked trees with subtle signs only he would recognize. Had concealed supplies along possible paths. Had created false trails. Had done everything he could to maximize his chances of survival. The bullet wound in his shoulder was severe yet not fatal. The round had passed through the muscle without hitting bone or major blood vessels. It hurt terribly, bled heavily, would probably become infected, yet it wouldn't stop him immediately. He ran for an hour, put distance between himself and the plantation, then stopped at a concealed stash, pulled out supplies he'd buried weeks earlier, cloth for bandaging, a knife, dried food, a water container, worked quickly to bind his wound, stopped the bleeding, then kept moving. The following 3 days were a blur of pain and determination. Elijah moved mostly at night, slept in concealed places during the day, followed streams to mask his scent from the dogs, avoided roads and settlements, survived on the supplies he'd stashed and on foraged food. The wound in his shoulder became infected on the second day. Fever set in. His body shook with chills despite the August heat, yet he kept moving north. Always north, following the North Star, following the path to freedom. Behind him, Thornwood Plantation was in turmoil. Calvin survived the beating, yet barely. Spent 2 weeks in bed. Doctor from town stated he'd live, yet would never be the same. Broken bones, healed incorrectly, face permanently disfigured, lost his right eye, suffered constant pain from his injuries. Yet worse than the physical damage was the psychological wound. He'd been beaten publicly by an enslaved person. Everyone had observed his mystique was shattered, his authority destroyed. He was merely a man who could bleed and lose and be humiliated. The other plantation proprietors were horrified. Not by Calvin's methods, most approved of those, yet by his failure. He displayed weakness, had permitted an enslaved person to defeat him, had created a dangerous precedent. The story spread rapidly. Within days, every enslaved person in the county knew about Elijah beating Master Thornwood. The story gave them hope, gave them ideas, gave them belief that opposition was possible. The plantation proprietors understood this was dangerous, attempted to suppress the story, claimed Elijah had cheated somehow, claimed Calvin had been ill, made justifications. Yet the enslaved people understood the truth, had witnessed it, and couldn't be convinced otherwise. Calvin sent slave hunters after Elijah, professional bounty hunters who specialized in tracking runaways offered a $1,000 reward, an enormous sum, sufficient to motivate hunters from multiple states. They searched for weeks, found signs of Elijah's passage, blood on leaves from his wounded shoulder, footprints in mud, evidence he'd camped in certain locations, yet they never captured him. Never even approached. Because Elijah had assistants. The Underground Railroad, the secret network that assisted escaped enslaved people reach free states. Conductors had been observing Thornwood Plantation, had heard about Calvin's brutality, had been seeking methods to assist. When they learned about Elijah's escape, about his courageous fight, they mobilized resources, found him in Tennessee. He was barely alive. Infection had nearly killed him. Body wasted from fever and lack of food. Yet he'd made it out of Mississippi, was within reach of freedom. The conductors concealed Elijah in a root cellar for 2 weeks, treated his infected wound, fed him, let him recover strength, then moved him along the network from Tennessee to Kentucky, from Kentucky to Ohio. Each stage of the journey risky, each border crossing hazardous. Yet the conductors were experienced, had moved hundreds of escaped enslaved people, understood the routes, understood the safe houses, understood how to avoid slave hunters. During October 1858, Elijah crossed into Ohio, collapsed in the home of a Quaker family named Miller, was delirious with fever. The Millers nursed him back to health. Took weeks, yet slowly Elijah recovered. His shoulder healed, his strength returned. And for the initial time in his life, he was free. Actually legally free, standing on free soil. No longer property, a human being with rights. Yet freedom came with grief. Elijah had left people behind. Grace, the woman he loved. Sarah, who instructed him how to fight, the 60 enslaved people who'd created disorder to assist him escape. He learned later that Sarah had been whipped nearly to death as punishment for her role, that 3 other enslaved people had been sold south, that Grace had been sold to a plantation in Alabama. All because they'd assisted him. The guilt was overwhelming. He'd won his freedom at the cost of their suffering. Elijah attempted to return for them, attempted to organize a rescue, contacted abolitionists, offered to guide a raid, yet they refused. Too hazardous, too likely to fail, too likely to get everyone killed. Told him the best thing he could do was survive, build a life, prove that escape was possible, be a symbol of hope. It wasn't the answer he wanted, yet it was the sole realistic one. During 1861, the Civil War started. Elijah immediately volunteered. Joined the initial Kansas Colored Infantry, one of the initial black regiments. Was 37 years old, yet strong and experienced. Fought at Island Mound during October 1862. Fought at Honey Springs during July 1863. Survived multiple battles. Rose to sergeant. Led men in combat. Killed Confederate soldiers without hesitation or guilt. Each one represented the system that had enslaved him. Each death was justice. When the war ended during 1865, Elijah was 41 years old. He returned to Mississippi as part of the occupying Union forces, went back to Thornwood Plantation, found it burned, abandoned. Calvin had fled when Union troops approached, never returned. The plantation was seized by the government. The land was supposed to be redistributed to freed enslaved people, yet the promise was broken. Eventually, the land was sold to northern investors. The freed enslaved people received nothing. Elijah found Sarah still there. She'd survived the war, was 72 years old, free, yet with nowhere to go, no resources, no support. Elijah took her north, got her settled in Cincinnati, paid for her care, visited her regularly, listened to her stories. She lived 3 more years, died during 1868. Her final words to Elijah were, "You made it count. You made my sacrifice worthwhile. Thank you." Elijah attempted to find Grace, learned she'd been sold multiple times. Last known location was a plantation near Mobile, Alabama. Yet by the time he traced her there during 1866, she was gone, dead from cholera during 1864. Never learned that slavery ended. Never learned that Elijah had survived. never got to experience freedom. The loss devastated Elijah. He'd hoped to discover her, to reunite, to build a life together. Yet that dream perished with her. Elijah settled in Ohio, married a woman named Rebecca during 1867. She was a former enslaved person from Kentucky, understood his pain, his nightmares, his survivor's guilt. They built a life together, had 7 children, worked hard, purchased land, farmed, raised their children in freedom, taught them to read and write, sent them to school, gave them opportunities he'd never possessed. Yet Elijah never forgot August 15, 1858. Never forgot the fight. Never forgot the people who'd assisted him. He told the story often to his children, to his grandchildren, to anyone who would listen, made sure it was recorded, made sure it was preserved. The story of the day an enslaved person defeated his master in single combat. The day the impossible occurred. The day one man's courage inspired hundreds. Elijah lived until 1903, died at age 79, had 14 grandchildren by then, 23 great-grandchildren, all free, all educated, all aware of what their grandfather had accomplished. His funeral was attended by over 200 people, black and white. Veterans who'd served with him, abolitionists who'd assisted him escape, family who loved him, friends who respected him. They interred him in a cemetery outside Cincinnati. His gravestone read, Elijah Freeman, born into bondage, 1824, died in freedom, 1903. He fought back. The story of Elijah and Calvin spread through multiple communities. The black community preserved it carefully, passed it down through generations, told it as proof that masters could be defeated, that the system could be opposed, that courage mattered. The story was embellished over time. Some versions stated Elijah killed Calvin. Some stated he freed all the enslaved people on the plantation. Some stated he was 7 feet tall and killed 10 men with his bare hands. Exaggerations, yet all based on the core truth that an enslaved person had defeated his master and escaped to freedom. White historians attempted to suppress the story, claimed it never occurred, claimed there was no documentation, claimed it was a myth created to inspire slave rebellions, yet excessive evidence existed. Court records demonstrated Calvin Thornwood owned a plantation in Mississippi. Census records demonstrated he owned enslaved people. Newspaper articles from 1858 mentioned an incident at Thornwood Plantation involving an escaped enslaved person. Veteran records demonstrated a man named Elijah Freeman served in the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry. The pieces could be assembled. The truth could be discovered if you searched. During 2010, a coalition of local historians and civil rights activists successfully lobbied for a historical marker. It was placed on County Road 12 where Thornwood Plantation once stood. The land is farmland now. Soybeans and corn where cotton once grew. Yet the marker acknowledges what occurred. Read site of Thornwood Plantation 1847 to 1865. During August 1858, an enslaved man named Elijah defeated his master Calvin Thornwood in single combat and escaped to freedom. His courage inspired countless others to oppose oppression. His story reminds us that even in the darkest times, opposition is possible. Minor acknowledgement, incomplete account, yet better than nothing, better than silence, better than pretending it never occurred. The marker receives visitors. Descendants of Elijah come to observe where it occurred. Civil rights groups bring students to learn the story. People leave flowers and stones. Minor tributes to a man who refused to accept his fate. Who fought back? Who won? What do you think of Elijah's story? Was his violence justified? Should he have fled instead of fighting? Should Sarah and the others have assisted him understanding the consequences? Should he feel guilty about the suffering his escape caused others? These questions don't have simple answers. Violence and opposition to oppression is morally complex. Assisting someone escape when it brings punishment upon yourself requires extraordinary courage. Surviving when others don't creates burden of guilt. Yet what's undeniable is that Elijah refused to accept his fate, chose to fight, chose freedom over safety, and through intelligence, planning, and courage, achieved what seemed impossible. His story matters because it counters the myth of the passive enslaved person. The myth that enslaved people accepted bondage, that they didn't oppose, that they waited for white saviors to free them. Stories like Elijah's prove otherwise. Prove that opposition was constant. That people fought back in every way they could. That they were strategic, courageous, and hazardous when given opportunity. The system of slavery required overwhelming violence to maintain because the people being enslaved never ceased fighting it. If you discovered this story powerful, subscribe to the channel. Share it with people who need to understand that opposition is always possible. That courage matters. That ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. That systems of oppression aren't permanent. That the feeble aren't always feeble and the strong aren't always strong. Until next time, remember, history is full of moments when someone refused to accept injustice. When someone stood up despite overwhelming odds. When someone fought back and won. Be that person when your moment arrives. Until next video.